Good afternoon. Good morning for you on the West Coast. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning, the 2020 Census and Adult Education. This is Michelle Dietschik. I'm the Senior Director of Programs at Pro-Literacy. I'm going to go through really quickly just some housekeeping rules so that we can run the webinar as effectively as possible and help you get the best experience and answer your questions. So first note would be that during the whole webinar, your phones will be muted. So that way we can avoid any background music or noise so it doesn't disrupt the presenters. We will be stopping throughout the webinar for questions. There's a couple different stopping points. We have some content and then also some question time at the end. But if you do have some questions while you're looking at some of the slides that you want to ask, you're welcome to do so in the question box on the right. There's a chat box and a questions box. Please make sure you use the questions box. I'll be monitoring those and sending them to our presenters throughout, and we'll get an opportunity. We do have over 400 people registered for the webinar, so we may not get to every single question, but I will say that I think some will be answered in later parts of the webinar or in some of the resources that we'll send you as part of it. And then one note, I know that usually people ask if there'll be a recording of the webinar. There will be a recording, and you will receive it via email at the email that you registered on the webinar tomorrow, within 24 hours. So with that, I will give us a start on the webinar. Again, I'm Michelle Dietschik at Pro-Literacy. We're an adult education organization for those of you who may not be members of Pro-Literacy. And I'm also the Vice President at the National Coalition for Literacy. The National Coalition for Literacy is an alliance of leading national and regional organizations across the United States dedicated to advancing adult education, family literacy, and English language acquisition. And through collaborative efforts with advocacy organizations and individuals, NCL works with national leaders and legislators to help them make really informed decisions about policies, regulations, and funding for adult education and family literacy. And as part of NCL's work for this year, we have made census a priority issue to focus on, in addition to all kinds of other advocacy efforts around funding for adult education. And our main goal in doing so is to ensure that as full of account as possible for adult learners and their families, because we know that adult learners and their families are at a high risk of being undercounted. And we'll talk a little bit about the census and why it's important, but that is why we focused on it this year. So NCL's objectives for the year related to the census are to give adult education practitioners the tools they need to support adult learners in understanding and completing the census. And we'll provide some information in this webinar. There are a series of other webinars, and there will be some resources that we will point to as well. And then we also want to provide information and advocacy so that policymakers understand and make provisions for the challenges that adult learners face that other audiences may not face. Having the census as an online option this year leads to challenges for adult learners, as we know, and also puts them at greater risk of possible fraud. So with that, I will turn it over to our presenters. We have Today with us, we have Michelle Ellison from the Census Bureau, and we have Tabitha Stickle from the Goodling Institute, and they're going to be presenting information to you. Like I mentioned, we will be stopping throughout to answer questions, and then we'll have a question time at the end as well. If we're not able to get to some of those questions, we will send them out answers as many as possible in the email that follows with the recording of the webinar. So with that, I will turn it over to Michelle.
Great. Thank you, Michelle. I appreciate that. I'm excited about the opportunity to be here today and to join this webinar. And if you just want to go to the next slide, what I'd like to do today is just start off by giving everybody sort of a Census 101 and explain why we need to care about the census and ensure that we get a complete and accurate count of everybody across America in 2020. So this next slide is an overview of the 2020 census. And as many of you all probably know, the census is mandated in the Constitution. We are required to do an actual count of every single person living in the United States every 10 years. And of course, the main reason for that is apportionment. The 435 seats in the House of Representatives are apportioned based on our numbers. But census data is also used for redistricting, and that's everything from legislative districts to voting districts to school districts are determined based on our numbers. Businesses, as you know, use census data to conduct market research, to determine where new stores will be located in communities, even to determine what they will sell in those stores. Planners use census data to determine where new roads are needed in a community and where new schools and new community centers should go. I often refer to the census as the ultimate RSVP. You know, you can't plan for an event if you don't know how many people are going to attend, and you can't plan for an emergency like a tornado or an ice storm if you don't know how many people in your community are going to be affected by that emergency. But probably the biggest thing that people just don't realize is how much funding is tied to census data. The number is huge. Over $675 billion every year for the next decade will be allocated to states and local governments based on census data. So I hope you understand how important it is that we count everyone. If we don't count everyone in our communities, we are quite simply leaving money on the table in federal funds, and not just in 2020, but also 2021, 2022, every year for the next decade. So it's vitally important that we get a complete and accurate count. Now, this next slide shows that we have several partner organizations that have done some phenomenal research for the census, and one of those organizations is George Washington University. They actually have looked at census data in every state and tried to put a per capita amount on the importance of participating in the census. And I live in Kentucky. I work out of Census Bureau headquarters, but work remotely from Kentucky. And for our state, they looked at just the top 16 federally funded programs that rely on census data. And keep in mind, there's over 300, but they looked at just the top 16 federally funded programs and came up with a number of $2,021 per person in Kentucky. So if you think about that, I bet everyone on this call can think of a family of 5, you know, a mom, a dad, 3 kids, that for whatever reason might be reluctant to respond to the census in 2020. That's over $10,000 every single year for the next decade that won't be coming into our Kentucky communities because one family chose not to participate. So I hope you understand just how important it is in every state that we make sure we are counting everybody to ensure that we get the federal funds that we need. So if you could go to the next slide, please. I wanted to give you a quick timeline and just show you how long we have been preparing for the 2020 census. We actually started with our first census test back in 2013. And since then, we have had several other tests of our systems. And we are now to go time almost. We're about 15 weeks away from when we'll actually start sending out census questionnaires or invitations for everybody to participate in the census. But this is a huge undertaking. This is something that we have been preparing for a long time. Next slide, please. So when will the actual census occur? I mentioned before that we are just about 15 weeks from when invitations will be sent out to every household across America. March 12th is when we will start sending those invitations. And for the first time in history, we are offering households an option to respond to their census online. So this is really exciting for the Census Bureau. The idea is in 2020, it's supposed to be so easy to complete your census questionnaire that you could be sitting in a doctor's office waiting room and pull out your smartphone and take the 10 minutes that it takes to reply. Now, a week after we start sending out those forms, we're going to start sending a reminder letter to every household that has not responded. And then a week after that, we're going to start sending out a reminder postcard. But by April, every house that has still not responded either online or by phone will receive a paper questionnaire in the mail. And the thought is, you know, we are aware there's still a digital divide in America. There are still plenty of people that do not have easy access to the internet. So by April, everyone that hasn't responded will get a paper questionnaire to provide another easy way for folks to respond. We'll send out another reminder letter after that. But by the middle of May, every household that has not responded to the census yet, either by phone, online, or by paper, will have someone come to their door to collect that information. Because as I said, we are required by law to collect the information for the census. So looking at these dates, think about what's happening in your community, what's happening in your state and your cities during that time. Here in Kentucky, you know, March 12th, when we start sending out those invitations, aligns right with March Madness basketball. And Derby weekend in our state is kind of that final push that if you haven't completed your census by this time, you really need to go ahead and do so that you won't get put in that non-response follow-up operation. So again, really try to figure out the best way that you can saturate your community with a message about the 2020 census in March, April, and the beginning of May to help increase the self-response rate. Next slide, please. Now, I wanted to talk to you all a little bit about what the risks are for not counting everybody in the 2020 census. And as you know, we have a mobile population. We have a lot of folks out there that have distrust for the government. Our response rates have been declining. So we have a lot of challenges that we're facing to ensure a complete and accurate count in 2020. Next slide, please. One of the best ways that organizations can help is by helping with outreach to our hard-to-count populations. Across America, we have several populations that we are really focused on outreach to because we know that historically they've been challenging to get to respond to census questionnaires. And a very useful tool that we have, if you go to census.gov/Rome, there's an incredible tool. It's a map of the United States where you can actually zoom in on your state. You can zoom in on your city, your county, and all the way down to the tract level to determine where the areas are that we have identified as being hard to count. And you'll notice on this map, the darker blue areas are the areas that have been identified as being at highest risk of being undercounted in 2020. So who are our hard-to-count populations? Well, I'm going to go through just a few examples with you. Number one, of course, is our foreign-born population. You know, we have a lot of immigrants, a lot of migrant workers, a lot of refugees, a lot of people living in the United States that may or may not be citizens of the United States and may be hesitant to respond to a government form coming in the mail asking them to list everybody that lives in their household. And this is something that has been a challenge for the census every decade, is reaching out to our foreign-born population and making sure they understand that it is safe, it's important, and it's so easy to respond to the census. And what we do with our foreign-born population is we try to reach out to the trusted voices in their communities. the people that they already have developed a strong relationship with that can help convey the message for us, that the census is confidential, that their answers are safe, that they are not shared with any other government agencies. Another challenging population to count is our rural communities. Historically, rural communities have had lower responses to the census and present some geographic difficulties for our census field reps as we're out knocking on doors trying to collect that information. Renters have historically been challenging to respond to censuses, and I think, I don't know if it's because they are a highly mobile population, they move often, sometimes they live in buildings that have locked gates or locked doors where we're not even able to knock on those doors to collect that information. People experiencing homelessness present certain challenges, and we do have a separate operation, a group quarters operation, where we work with facilities that are serving folks that are experiencing homelessness to make sure that we're counting everybody. Low-income households have historically been challenging to count in censuses. Seniors, I listed seniors here. They have not historically been hard to count, but with this decade, with the changes coming in 2020, I think about our seniors across America receiving a mailing from the census directing them to go online to complete their census questionnaire. And I know that, we are constantly warning our seniors not to give out information, personal information online, not to answer the door if they don't know who's knocking. So while I think it's very important and we need to be sure that we are protecting our seniors from any potential scams, it's also so important that we educate the seniors because so much of the funding that they depend on is dwindling, and that's based on, we have to have an accurate count of where the need is to ensure that adequate funding. African Americans, especially African American males, have historically been hard to count in censuses. And I think this is interesting. This is something that we only learned after World War II, when more African American males enlisted in the military than we even had numbers for in the entire United States. This was a big eye-opener for the Census Bureau that we have an underserved population that we really need to focus our efforts on. College students present another challenge. For college students, the timing of the census is what tends to be challenging. It's right in the middle of spring break, of midterms. March Madness basketball is when we're sending out these forms to our college students across America. And unfortunately, many college students, when they do take the time to respond to the census, they tend to list their parents' address on their census questionnaire instead of their campus address where they live and stay most of the year. That's where we want to ensure our college students are counted. And then the last one is children, especially children age 0 to 4. And if you'll go to the next slide, please. Children age 0 to 4 are the largest undercounted age population across America. This graph here shows that children age 5 to 9 are the second largest undercounted age population. And the graph on the right shows that this problem has just been getting worse since 1980. One of the big problems is that parents, the adult in the household, will fill out their census questionnaire, they'll return it, but they will leave their small children off the form. I always use my child as an example. That's my little boy up in the corner. And I think about it like this. If I don't include my little boy on the 2020 census, I don't get a chance to correct that mistake until 2030. And by that time, my little boy will have already gone through elementary school, middle school, and will be starting high school, and there won't have been any funding allocated for him. So this problem with the undercount of children has a direct impact on underfunded schools and overcrowded classrooms across the nation. Next slide, please. So how can you help? One of the big ways that we are asking partners in the community is first help us by fighting misinformation. Disinformation. The Census Bureau, as I mentioned, is required by law to keep the information that we collect confidential. All Census Bureau employees swear a lifetime oath to protect respondent information. And any penalty, there's a penalty for wrongful disclosure up to 5 years of imprisonment and a fine of $250,000. And that is for all Census Bureau employees. So we really do need to work with partners in the community that can help convey this message and reassure folks that the information that they provide is protected by law. Next slide, please. Another way that you can help fight misinformation, disinformation, and scams is by simply making folks aware of what questions we will be asking in the census and what we don't ask in the census. The questions are very basic: name, age, race, ethnicity, number of people that live there. What we don't ask, we will never ask for a full social security number, a mother's maiden name, bank account information, or donation of any kind. Anything like that should be a red flag to folks that this is not a legitimate census questionnaire. So we need to go ahead and start educating people now about what the questions are. Next slide, please. Now, the census, one of the things I'm very excited about with this new online option is we are going to be able to provide an opportunity for folks that speak different languages to toggle into these first 12 different languages, from Spanish to Japanese. You can actually toggle into those languages online to complete your census questionnaire. And we also offer language assistance in 59 other languages, either by phone or through YouTube videos that we'll be making public. So we are doing as much as we can to reach our foreign-born population and make sure that they are able to respond to the census in the languages that they speak. Next slide, please. There are so many resources available that partners can use to help spread the message about the 2020 census. If you go to our website, 2020census.gov/partners, you'll find fact sheets, toolkits, posters, drop-in news articles, press kits, and press releases. So there's a wealth of materials out there that you can use to start getting the information out about the census. Next slide, please. And I also wanted to direct you to some of the free resources that our teachers have available to use to begin teaching about the census. We will not be successful unless we can teach about the census in every classroom across America. And at census.gov/schools, we have free resources available from preschool, kindergarten, all the way up to middle school, high school, and adult education and ESL classes. So materials that are available to be printed, to be used in classrooms, tools, maps, a whole wealth of resources that teachers can use. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide. I just want to talk about some of the ways that you can connect with us on social media and online. We do have a way that you can sign up to get emails directly from us. I know that we all get a lot of emails, and you are welcome to unsubscribe after 2020, but I would encourage you to go ahead and sign up and start getting the most current information directly from the Census Bureau, and connect with us on social media. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter, because it's a very easy way to share some of the materials that we have. Next slide.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Thanks so much, Michelle. This is Michelle Dietrich. We have a couple of Michelles on the phone. Now's a good time to stop and pause on some of the questions that we got while Michelle was speaking. We have some good ones, especially that are related to adult learners. So, Michelle, if you don't mind, I'll just shoot these off to you, and you can answer them for everybody to hear. One was, will people receive the postcards to P.O. boxes? How will people who don't receive mail at the residence know about the census?
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's a great question. So no, we will not, the Census Bureau does not mail invitations to households that only receive their mail via P.O. box. We do have an operation called Update Leave, where we visit those households and try to collect that information on the day of our visit. And if nobody's there, then we will leave the questionnaire at that household. But that's a great question about the post offices.
Great. Another one related to the online form this year. How will people access the web survey? Will they be registering for a PIN or receive something else in order to participate in that way?
I believe, and on the line is my colleague from Census Bureau headquarters, Kathy Hart. And I believe that every invitation will have a code that comes with it, so that when you're asked to go online, you'll be asked to enter that code that came with the invitation you received in the mail. However, for the first time ever, we're trying to eliminate all barriers for people to respond. So if you don't actually have that code that came with your household mailing, you'll be able to enter your address and complete the census that way. And on the back end, we will connect that answer with the mailing that we sent you. Does that sound about right, Kathy, or did you have anything to add to that?
Absolutely. You've covered all of it, Michelle, very well. And the introduction of the non-ID processing, which means you can log on and it's based on your housing unit address. And if you are on the train or the bus, just at an opportunity and you don't have your code, it's okay. We will take out the duplicates in the algorithms on the back end.
Great, thank you both. And a related question for the online survey, may surveys be completed online before April 1st, like when someone receives the notice, or is there a specific time where they can be accessed?
I think, as Michelle mentioned, even though we have April 1 as Census Day, we're opening the instrument 2 weeks early, so by middle of March, you'll be able to access it.
Excellent, thank you. And then one related to state-specific data. You had mentioned Kentucky a couple times. The March-April 2020 timeline for sending out the census and paperwork, is that the same for all states? I wanted people that are in different states on this webinar, I have questions about that timing. I wonder if you could address that.
Yeah, the timing will be the same across the United States. Great.
And there was one that came up that was very quick. I know that I can answer. Was did a citizenship question end up on the survey? And the good news is, at least to our audience, is that no, it did not. The Supreme Court decided that it was not constitutional. Anything else you want to add, Michelle or Kathy?
I would like to add that yes, the citizenship question is not included. However, what we're hearing from our community partners is that some of the damage has already been done. And so we really are relying on those trusted voices to make sure that people understand that the citizenship question is not on there, but also the data is protected. And as Michelle went through the fines and the prison time, all the information is confidential and safe. And to please encourage anybody that has any hesitancy about responding, even though the question of citizenship is not on there, that just to let them know that the data is still safe and secure.
Thank you. And that actually answers another question that someone had asked about learners, especially ELL learners, making sure that their information is protected. Can you just talk a little bit more about the confidentiality, just to reassure our programs?
So I think as far as the confidentiality on the slide, we do, just to repeat it because it's worth repeating, Census Bureau employees take an oath for life. We take that very seriously. We face $250,000 in fines as well as jail time if any of the information is released. And the systems, we've been through a number of systems tests. We are ready. Breaches, people have said, what's going to happen when someone tries to access the systems and breach the systems? It's happening now. We get regular attacks on a pretty frequent basis, and we have systems in place to make sure that none of those efforts are penetrate the systems. And so we're very well prepared from that aspect as well. So we are not expecting any type of a data breach through our systems either.
Great, thank you. I have a couple questions related to adult educators helping learners. There's a few related questions. I'm going to wait till Tabitha does her section and answer those questions at the end, because I think she might answer some of those in her slides. Can people that are wary use pseudonyms instead of their real names?
Can you repeat that just a sec?
Can people that may have apprehension about completing the census use pseudonyms instead of their real names?
Every webinar, I can't wait to get the question that stumps me. And this is the one that now stumps me. I will have to check on this and I can get back to you. I don't see why they can't, but I am not 100% certain of that answer. So I will definitely get back in touch with you. Anyway, of the notes, we can put that in to provide clarity.
Okay, no problem. And what we can do is we can put together some frequently asked questions that we're not able to address today and get those out to everybody as well, because there are a lot of questions coming in. I know there are a couple questions about being census. Yeah, go ahead. Hi, Michelle and Kathy, are you there?
I'm here. I think we might have lost Kathy. I'm here.
Okay. I think she was going to add another point, but we'll wait till she comes back on. I know that there are some questions.
Could I follow up on one question quickly?
Yeah, of course.
Uh-oh.
Go ahead, Kathy. We can hear you. I'm not sure if Kathy knows that we can hear her. Kathy, are you there?
I have dropped audio, so I will try to reconnect via
Okay.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just regained audio.
Okay, great. Kathy, do you want to go ahead? Sounds like we might be having.
I was just going to say something very quickly about the. Perhaps the audio is failing. Can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay. From a genealogy standpoint, I have the benefit of going back and tracking my my grandparents and my great-grandparents and through various generations, and it's pretty exciting. And I would not have been able to find them if they had used a pseudonym. So that's one reason why people might want to reconsider, but again, more clarity to come on that question.
Great, thank you. And there are a few questions that are related to the census workers and others that I know that we'll get to later in the slides, so I'm going to hold on a couple of those. Can you answer a couple questions related to incarcerated individuals and homeless individuals and how they will be counted? I know how they can participate.
Sure. Persons that are experiencing incarceration, we do those via administrative record. And so they will not be able to participate in the enumeration, but they will be counted through the prison systems where they reside. Persons experiencing homelessness, we have an excellent weekend that we call it's a weekend that is designed because the persons experiencing homelessness, it's a pretty mobile population. And so we have a weekend every decennial where we blanket the neighborhoods going down to the tract level. We work with soup kitchens. We work with other organizations that service and are patrons of persons experiencing homelessness to let them know that this is coming. We also work with community, say the police department, so that they know that we're going to be out there. And we just start enumerating. We put boots on the ground. We go to tent cities. We go under bridges. We go down streets. Every area where persons experiencing homelessness may live, we will find them. We will knock on windows of cars that look like they are now where people may be living, and it's a pretty successful operation to count persons experiencing homelessness.
Great, thank you very much. I do have a bunch of other questions, but I think some of them will be answered by Tabitha. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tabitha, and then I will get back to some of these questions and additional ones at the end of the broadcast. So Tabitha, would you like to start out?
Great, thanks so much. So I am going to look at kind of two different sections for y'all, hopefully answering some of those questions. First of all, what you can do in your community and what organizations are doing in the community, and then how adult education programs in specific can organize around the census. So if we can go to next slide, please. So one national organization that has done extensive work on the census is the American Library Association. You see here the picture of the guide that they put out to the 2020 census. You can download this if you just type into a search engine, ALA census guide. This is what comes up. I do want to just make one note as to the guide that they have available now. It was written and published before the Supreme Court decided on the citizenship question. They are coming out with a new updated guide that will take all of that language out because, as Kathy and Michelle had pointed out, the citizen question is not there. So if you download this guide, just be aware that that language will be taken out, and there should later this month be an updated guide. The ALA has really worked on getting their libraries, the different library branches, information on the timeline of the census, explanation on common questions, learning about the hard to reach communities, and then just the FAQs that are all covered in that library guide. Next slide. There are over 16,000 public libraries in the United States, and they are really working to, as they did in the last census, create awareness within the community about the census. So in 2010, there were a little over 6,000 public universities around the nation that hosted events and had Census Bureau coming in to do different special events and really mobilize around the census. So part of that is delivering information. There is being access to the internet and the computers that people can use to fill out the census. Also being a place where people just think they can get trusted information, which is really important, especially given all the uncertainty about the citizenship question. And then library employees are working on learning how to train users on accessing the online forms or filling out the forms, the paper forms that people would get mailed. In general, this is particularly important not only because of how many libraries there are, but especially where they are located. So if we'll go to the next slide. So 99% of hard to count census tracts have a public library located within 5 miles. So all of those hard to count communities that were mentioned earlier, rural populations, individuals experiencing homelessness, college students certainly, even if they maybe don't prioritize going to a public library, they do live within 5 miles, or the vast majority of those individuals do live within 5 miles of the library. So the ALA is really taking this on as an issue of equity, access, and inclusion, not only because they are great portals of access for information about the census and filling it out, but also to make sure that we have as accurate a representation in Congress and our school funding, you know, and all the different things that the census affects, as accurate representation as we can. Next slide, please. So, and that's just one example of an organization that has done a lot of work on the census already. And again, and if you just search for ALA census, you'll get access to a lot of resources. But one thing that you can do as a community member yourself is to participate in complete count committees. So these these are committees that are made of key members of a community that will help create specific messaging that really targets the local groups in their community, because these are the people that know what's happening on the ground. So just as Michelle, you know, detailed her earlier presentation on March Madness and the Kentucky Derby, you know, in your state, in your locality, there may be some other special messaging that will resonate more. You know, certainly here in State College with Penn State, you know, a message around football is definitely one that's going to catch a lot of attention. So CCCs are people who are members of the community. They organize around the census and they really work on coming up with messaging, events, outreach to the community, and making sure that the members of their community are represented and get that census filled out. So next slide, please. It's very easy to find a committee if you go to the census link that's at the bottom, or you can also just go to the main census website and type in complete count committees. You'll find a list. This shows where various CCCs have already formed in the nation to mobilize around the 2020 census. This is a screenshot from earlier in the year. So there are committees being founded, you know, as we speak. And if you don't see one in your area, then maybe you can be one of the people who works with your local governments to form one. So make sure to check that out, because that's a great way for you as a community member to get involved, but then also you can work on getting your adult ed program involved as well. So next slide, please. Okay, so this brings us to looking at what you can do as an adult educator and as members of adult education programs. Adult ed is really in a special position to help get a complete count, because we work with a lot of learners who come from those hard to count populations. Next slide, please. Okay, so basic idea of what you can do to organize around the census is doing things like this webinar, being informed on what's happening. There are a lot of organizations that have created materials around the census, have tons of resources available for people to draw upon. So you don't feel like you have to be reinventing the wheel when you want to put census materials in your classroom. The NCL website has an entire page that you can just scroll on and on and on and see dozens of different organizations and resources that you can immediately drop into your class. You can see at the bottom of the page there the link to some of those resources, as well as here in that first bullet point, some of the other organizations that have developed census materials as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so part of becoming informed is learning the census basics, what was covered earlier by Michelle and Kathy, knowing that the census is 10 questions. This is not a longer survey form, the American Community Survey. This is a short questionnaire. It does not ask questions about citizenship. It does not ask about, you know, birthplace, those kinds of questions that really deal with the immigration status have been stricken from the census, and that's a really important lesson or a really important message for us to put into our classrooms. You can also learn more about the time frame. Know that April 1st is the National Census Day. You can look on the census website to see who in your state and community is already doing census work. And you can know that although you can help people learn about the form, individuals have to fill out the census form for themselves. So making sure that you know that kind of boundary of, we can help people understand about the census and practice filling it out, but each individual has to actually fill out the census for themselves. So next slide. Okay, so on that note of making sure that people can fill out the census for themselves, there are a lot of ways in which you can get that knowledge to your students throughout your program, whether it's through kind of just informal or formal announcements, whether it's integrating into your lessons or having specific ongoing campaigns that have different events. For those of you who have student governments with your programs, or individuals that are both officially or unofficially kind of student leaders, those are great individuals to get engaged in the census because they're important sources of trust within the community. And the more trust you can help build with particularly these hard to reach or the hard to count communities, the more accurate account we're going to have. So next slide. Okay, so breaking it up into kind of 3 different levels of the adult ed program, we have here some ideas for what teachers, students, and programs can do. So teachers more broadly can, teach reading using the census questions, making sure that individuals understand what those questions are asking. This is, particularly important if you have English as a second language learners or individuals with lower reading levels or lower reading comprehension, just really making sure that people understand what questions are being asked and how to fill that out accurately. There also are tons of resources on how to use census data in math classes. I think earlier we saw in one of the screenshots, Statistics in Schools has incredible resources for lesson plans and activities, tools to integrate that you can just drop right into your class. And then there's also covering the digital literacy aspect and making sure that people feel, familiar and comfortable with using a computer and filling out online forms. It doesn't have to be super extensive. Raising awareness can be anything from integrating an entire lesson plan or just writing, math test questions that happen to mention the census. Anything that can really get the census, the 2020 census, into people's consciousnesses is great. You can provide students with different practice activities. They can read information about the census and why it is mandated by law. That's a great civics or US history activity there. Provide easy to read information for students, and then also provide that computer and internet access. And then from the program level, there's a lot of different things that programs can do to really mobilize around the census. So this is anything from doing census workshops with all of your personnel, having events to celebrate the National Census Day, and having members of your program represented on the Complete Counts Committee. And again, a lot of ideas for all of these bullet points can be found on the NCL website at the link at the bottom there. Next slide, please. This is an example of what the printed form looks like. At this point, we don't have a model for the online form, but I know that there are some people working on developing some resources around that with NCL and particularly with World Ed. So the more you can provide these kind of practice questions or make people familiar with what the census looks like, the more comfortable they're going to be with it. And this is particularly the case when you can have those trusted community members, like those unofficial kind of student leaders, engaging with the census practice, and then sharing that information with others. Next question. Or sorry, next slide, next question. The Census Bureau itself has so many classroom materials available online. You can see just a quick screenshot there of some of the different categories. There are PDFs, lesson plans, activities, everything you can dream of available on the Census website. You can find at the census link at the bottom, but also, again, if you go to that NCL website, you will have more information than you could ever want about the census between those two resources. And so you can tailor it to your specific classes, but it also is stuff that's pretty much ready to drop right into your lesson plans. Next slide. World Education is also working on a Stand Up and Be Counted initiative. This includes individuals submitting stories about participating in last census, getting stories of people who have worked as enumerators. It provides information on how to avoid scams. You know, if someone's asking for that Social Security or mother maiden name, that is not the census, so no, not to participate. And then particularly important that we'll cover in these next couple of slides is looking at the census jobs, which is a great source of employment for people who, particularly those that are in those hard to count populations. Next slide, please. California has really been one of the states out in front with organizing around the census. There is a webinar that we did earlier in the fall where we had a couple of people on from various California adult education organizations and agencies talking about all of the resources that they have created. One is that Civic Objective and Additional Assessment Plan, the COAP, which is a systematic way of integrating census information into adult education instruction and assessment. And they also have a prep course for students on how to become census takers in their communities. The census is still hiring enumerators, so this is something to possibly encourage your students to think about if they're looking for some good part-time employment. Next slide, please. So there are hundreds of thousands of individuals that will be hired for census takers or enumerators. And those are the individuals that go kind of house to house collecting the household demographic information. They can make pretty good money depending on where they are. So for instance, in San Diego County, the starting pay is $20.50. They're also, reimbursed for mileage. So it is a good source of income for individuals. And again, you can see on the NCL census page, there's the webinar recording from when we talked earlier with some California individuals who had developed the COAP and done extensive work on getting students ready to apply for census jobs. Next slide, please. So just a couple of basics for those who plan to apply. You need to be at least 18 years old, have a social security number. Right now, they are looking for US citizens, but I know in the past, they have also hired legal residents, particularly when those individuals provide access to a linguistic group that has been undercounted or that there hasn't been a great response rate from. In general, be able to pass that criminal background check. Smaller misdemeanors I'll just say that there is an investigation that happens to the criminal background check, and so even if somebody has a smaller misdemeanor maybe on their record, it shouldn't preclude them from applying. They may as well, if they can, just apply, and hopefully they can figure out how to make that work. And then for males, they need their selective service number. Next slide, please. Okay, and just to kind of wrap up, if you or your organization has already begun taking action on the census and developing materials, NCL would love to hear from you. Please send me an email with the materials that you're developing. We are always looking to add more resources to that NCL webpage. If it's one thing that I learned about teachers is we love to be able to share things with each other. And so if you're willing to share the things that your program is doing, please shoot me an email and let me know. And next slide. This is just if you have any other questions about what we've talked about here, because I know we're getting towards the end of the hour, feel free to send an email to any or all of us there. And we'll do our best to answer your questions. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tabitha. Really appreciate it. We have a number of questions. We'll go over a little bit over 3 o'clock if anybody wants to stay on. We won't cut it off at 3 o'clock. But I did want to mention, I did send out information while Tabitha was talking. There were a number of questions around a mock survey, what it looks like, what the envelope looks like. And Tabitha touched on that a little bit and mentioned also that NCL and World Ed are working on additional pieces for adult literacy programs to use with learners, so they can see really what they're supposed to be looking at and what questions should be included and should not be included to help adult learners along the way. So stay tuned for that, and Pro Literacy will continue to be sending information out from now until the census on all these different resources. And I would also encourage you in general to go to the NCL website. It's national-coalition-literacy.org. And there's information there. I think it's on these slides, so we'll make sure we include it on there as well. And then all of you, Tabitha, Kathy, and Michelle, if you're up for a couple more questions, I do have some that are related to the form. One person had asked if, and I don't know the answer to this, the online form, can the form be started and then finished at a later time, or does it need to be filled out in one setting?
That is a good question. I'm not sure the answer of that. I know that it's very short. The average is about 10 minutes to complete the census questionnaire. But I do suspect that there will probably be a way to go back into that. But I think we'll need to follow up with you guys with the answer on that one.
Yeah, there's a certain period of time that you have to complete the form. There were discussions of can they just go back in, log in, and or just pick the form up where they left off. And as Michelle said, I'm still not quite sure where they were on the testing and the final decision on that, but we will get that. We'll get the answer to you soon.
Great, and we have some questions around people who might be traveling out of the country and they're not able to be here during the census period. How would they participate?
They can still participate by logging on if they would like. We do count people. Now, if you've been out of the country for 6 months, and that's the timeline that they're using, then you would not be included in the census. But they can also, hopefully they would have access to the online form. But if not, there's also a call-in feature to our questionnaire assistance centers where they can call in and report that way as well. I just want to stress that the Census Bureau, even though we have an online self-response option, telephone, and then also paper, it is just our preference that people respond which way they choose to do it. Obviously, the online questionnaire is the largest tax savings to, largest savings to taxpayers. But whichever way people are the most comfortable with is what we would encourage them to do. But those would be the two options for people that are out of the country for 4 or 5 weeks.
Okay, great. And there are several questions which I think are an important one for our audience. A lot of adult education programs want to help learners complete their survey. So we have a bunch of questions on the legalities around that. Can you talk a little bit about how they can help them without, of course, completely filling it out for them and the guidelines there?
Sure. We get this question often. What we want to stress is that helping someone complete a questionnaire is absolutely something that you can do. Of course, it's their personal information, but we have multi-generations coming together and people that may not understand what the questions mean. Tabitha, you were talking about libraries. You know, with the first line on self-response, 25% of the housing units in the United States still do not have a computer connected to the internet. And so we are preparing libraries to have the resources. And so they were asking how much they can help. And they can help as much as they would like. What we do not encourage is that we've also heard from people that share our passion and they want to get a laptop or an iPad and show up at community events and take information over their laptop for anybody that wants to respond. That is something that we would choose to say, please don't do that. And there are a lot of reasons. We are sworn employees, and we would encourage that if you would like to do that, please apply for a job. So helping your neighbor, helping your families, helping your friends, absolutely. Taking a tablet and going out to an event or an activity that you know is happening and taking the information on behalf of someone is something that we would discourage.
Great, and then a couple of questions around multifamily households. How would those be counted? Who should be filling that out? Who should be the main person?
So it's whoever they consider the head of household. You know, that's just a family choice. As long as one person is responding on behalf of all, obviously duplicates are going to happen. People are going to respond thinking that, oh, let me just take care of this for everybody. And then they realize that they've completed a questionnaire twice. And we have algorithms in the back end that will wipe out the dupes, the duplicates, in choosing the ones with the most, the answer or the response with the most comprehensive information. So that's really just a choice within the family of who they want to hold as that job as the head of household.
Great, thank you. And there are a lot of questions around providing educational materials, having census speakers come to local programs. The one thing that I would say was around that there will be multiple webinars like this that you can participate in. There are also multiple National Coalition for Literacy members that will be participating and presenting in-person presentations at various conferences throughout the country. There's a schedule on the National Coalition for Literacy's website, so I'd also encourage you with that. We have seen some requests in some areas for people to come and talk about the census. I think we can accommodate that as much as possible when someone's in the area. So email us, email NCL, and we'll try to make that work as much as possible. But I think that some of the information you'll find on NCL's website will really help you provide classes or information sessions to learners and instructors about how to help learners participate in the census.
And if I could also, oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, go ahead, please.
If I could also add, we have amazing area census offices across the nation, and we have partnership specialists, and we can also send the link of how you can get in touch with the regional or the area census office so that you can establish a relationship with your partnership specialist. They are there to help you with presentations. They are there to guide you through questions. You're always welcome to contact Michelle or I, but we are two of a small staff, and so we do depend on and we appreciate the field and the partnership specialists in establishing that relationship. And so if people haven't reached out to you from our regional offices, then we will provide you a link that you can make an introduction and talk to someone in your community.
Perfect, that's even better. Thank you so much for that. And I think that Tabitha had put up the guide for American Library Association and also information about how close libraries are. Libraries are always a really good place to go as a first starting point. If you're not sure who to contact or you haven't heard back from somebody, that's a really good place to go. And along with that, there was a question related to the languages that were supported. There was a slide on that, and of course we'll send the slides out so everybody can look at those again. But there are multiple languages that are supported for both support and for support throughout. So I wanted to emphasize that as well. Anything else you want to add on that part, Kathy or Michelle?
I think we're good on that. The slide is very extensive. Thank you.
I think that probably hits on most of them. There are a couple questions related to enumerators, related to the rate of pay, and I know you talked about the qualifications. Do you have any sense of the rate of pay on those?
We have a link that we can also share, that it's an interactive link that you can just do the drop down by your state and community level, and it will show you the pay rates that we're currently offering. Please know that as we get closer to census, we're monitoring the hiring rates on a daily basis. We need, in order to get to the 500,000 enumerators, we have to recruit 2.7 million people, which is just an insane amount of people to recruit. So far, we're doing okay. We're a little behind just because the economy is doing so well, and so we strongly appreciate your passing the word about the census jobs. But we will include the link so that you can go into your particular state and area and find out what the pay is. Having said that, if we get to the point closer to the census that we are still in need of people, you may see some areas the pay rate increase. And as Tiffany also mentioned, if you have an infraction on your background check, please know that there will be an adjudication process. So if you don't mind hearing the word no, it might be a good opportunity to have another start and just apply, and you might hear a yes. So we certainly appreciate you passing that word.
Great, thank you. I know there were some additional questions around pseudonyms and, using person one, person two, and we're going to get some information about that. Michelle and Kathy are going to look into that, and we'll get that information back out to everybody as quickly as possible. And I think some of the other questions that were remaining were answered in some of the PowerPoint slides, so we'll make sure that gets out to everybody through the recording. And we'll continue to monitor the frequently asked questions and put together a list and point people in the right direction. Please contact us, please contact NCL. And as Michelle and Kathy had said, there are so many people out there that are helping, and they are seeking people who speak multiple languages. That was one of the questions that was here too. So they'll be out there in the community helping you in multiple ways, and you'll start to see them more and more. So I think that probably brings us to about the end here. Thank you, Kathy, Tabitha, and Michelle. Really appreciate your time today to give information to people. And as I had mentioned before, there will be a number of other webinars and in-person presentations. So stay tuned. We'll make sure that you know about all of those. And I guess that brings us to conclusion. Thanks, everybody. We'll send out the recording of it within 24 hours.
Thank you so much.
Great, thank you.
Bye-bye.